Okay, so welcome to the lesson on the cells. The main thing that you want to be thinking about when you think about cells is that they are the building blocks for the body. So absolutely everything in your body is made up of cells. This subject can be quite difficult to learn because cells are really difficult to visualize. So when we're talking about bones and muscles, hair and skin, it's really easy to visualize those because we can look at the bone in the arm, we can feel it, we can visualize that bone in there or the muscles that surround it. Cells is a little bit more difficult because with the naked eye we can't see cells. So I really want you to think about cells like little mini humans. So every cell in your body is like a little mini human. It is able to do everything that you are able to do. And so if we think about it in those terms, it's slightly easier to start visualizing these cells or the actions and the functions that the cells have. So first of all, we're going to look at the cell diagram and the labels that we've got. So our cell is made up of an outer covering called the cell membrane. And this is a semi-permeable membrane. So it allows substances in and it allows substances out. Our cells are made up of 70% water. And the fluid that sits inside the cell, it's like a semi-fluid. So it's not water, it's a bit more of a jelly-like substance. So we call it a semi-fluid. It's called cytoplasm. And within this cytoplasm, we've got these little structures that are suspended within that semi-fluid. Those structures are called organelles. An organelle really just means mini organ. So again, that reference to the human body. So we have our larger organs that have got functions within our body, and our cells have got organelles, mini organs that are doing the same functions, but for the cell. So the first structure we're going to look at is label E, which is the large sort of circular organelle. This is called the nucleus. This is the brain of the nail, brain of the cell. So our DNA is held within the nucleus. And that DNA tells the cell exactly what it's going to do, what colour the eyes are going to be, what height the person's going to be, the colour of their hair. And so the cell is able to provide that responsibility. So nucleus is the brain of the nail, holds the person's DNA. Our next label is B, which is our mitochondria. Little bean-shaped structure there. Mitochondria is referred to as a powerhouse. So this is the structure that provides the cell with power. Using the protein that we eat, and the energy sources from the food and the nutrients that we eat, the mitochondria will power the cell, give the cell energy to work. Our next label is C, down here, which is the Golgi body. When protein enters the cell, so protein is really important for growth and repair. So the cell uses that protein to be able to grow, reproduce, and then repair any areas of the cell that need it. The Golgi body sorts and delivers the protein. So it's responsible a little bit like a sorting place for Royal Mail. the protein gets delivered there, and the Golgi body sorts the protein and then delivers it to areas of the cell that need it. And then coming off from there, we've got D, which is our endoplasmic reticulum. And you can see on the diagram, it's like a series of canals. I want you to think about that like a transportation network. So your endoplasmic reticulum are canals within the cell provided for transport, so to transport things that need to be around the cell. Our next is label A. This is our lysosome. Little circular structures there, lysosome. And these are our waste disposal units. So any waste that is accumulated in the cell as a result of processes that are taking place, the lysosome will dispose of that waste. Our next one is another sort of semi-spherical structure, which is our ribosome or ribosomes. And these are our protein houses. So when the protein enters the cell from the nutrients and the food that we eat, it is stored at the ribosome or ribosome before it is then sorted and delivered by the Golgi body. And lastly, we have a little label that I added on here, which are the centrioles. Centrioles are responsible for reproduction of the cell. So all cells are able to reproduce. It's called simple cell division. The technical name for that cell reproduction is mitosis. So nail cells, hair cells, skin cells, muscle, bone cells, all reproduce via mitosis. So although they're very lengthy words and sound a little bit complicated, ultimately you can now see that your cell can do everything that you can do. So it's got a brain that's going to control it. It's able to store substances, deliver substances around the cell. It's able to dispose of waste. It's able to power itself. It's able to get rid of waste and reproduce. So effectively, our cell is just a mini human doing what all the human can do in each of its cells. Metabolize, that's the word I was looking for, with your mitochondria, the powerhouses. Metabolism is that ability to use nourishment and convert it into energy, and that is what the mitochondria are doing. So your cell is able to metabolize just as our bodies are able to metabolize. So then really that leads us on to the functions of the cell, which is pretty much what we've just talked about. So we have 7 functions of the cell. The first one is growth. So our cells are able to grow, they're able to repair using the protein and the energy that's sourced from our diet. Our second function is respiration. When we think about respiration, it's clear to think about us breathing in and out. But that oxygen and carbon dioxide ultimately has to go to somewhere or come away from somewhere. And so we call this respiration external respiration. But then that oxygen that we breathe in gets into the blood circulation, and that blood circulation takes the oxygen to the cells. It delivers the cell through that semi-permeable membrane. delivers that oxygen to the cell, and the cell will give back the carbon dioxide. And that exchange of gases is called cellular respiration. So the cell isn't breathing into its lungs and breathing out like we are with our external respiration, but the oxygen is being delivered and the carbon dioxide is being dropped off. And so that movement of gases between the cell is called cellular respiration. So the oxygen is delivered, the cell is able to use the oxygen, and that byproduct or waste product that happens as a result of the oxygen use, carbon dioxide, is got rid of by the cell back into the blood circulation. Our third function is our cells are sensitive, so sensitivity or irritability, sometimes it's referred to. So our cells have the ability to sense, and they respond to changes in the environment within the body. So they have the ability to be irritated and then respond to that change in environment. Nice, easy one for the next one. Movement. Our cells are able to move. Our next one is metabolism. Our cells are able to take nutrients from our diet and metabolize that into energy, and that energy will power the cell. Our next function is excretion. Our cells are able to deal with and get rid of waste products using those lysosomes, that structure organelle in the cell. It is a waste disposal unit. So cells can deal with their own waste and excrete it as necessary. And lastly, reproduction, most important, mitosis, using the centrioles, the organelle, the centrioles in the cell to reproduce all cells of the body via mitosis. So if you look at that list of your 7 functions, it's exactly what you can do as a human. So your cells are just replicating what you're doing to keep your body alive. Each of your cells are doing the same. We're able to grow and repair. We are able to respire. So our body via our respiratory system can externally respire, have an exchange of gas externally, but our cells have an internal exchange of gas, which is called cellular respiration. Our body is able to sense things, sensitivity, hot, cold, sharp, soft. Our bodies are able to be irritated, and so we adapt to that change in our environment. We're able to move using our muscular system, move substances through our body as well via our visceral muscular tissue. We're able to metabolize, so the food we eat we convert into energy. We're able to get rid of waste, and we are able to reproduce. So that's why it's hard to visualize a cell, but when you think about it as just little mini humans, much easier to visualize. So cells on their own are great, really clever, very tiny little structures, but on their own they can't do very much more than those specific functions. So what happens is when we start to group cells together, we form something called tissue. So groups of cells form tissue. Our first type of tissue is epithelial. E-P-I-T-H-E-L-I-A-L, epithelial. And this type of tissue is linings and coverings. So the lining of your stomach would be epithelial tissue. Our skin is made up of epithelial tissue. The inside of our nose is epithelial tissue. So linings and coverings in the body is made up of epithelial tissue. There's a few different types of epithelial tissue when you research into it. The most important for you to be aware of is a type of epithelial tissue that's called ciliated. And that is an epithelial tissue that's got tiny little hairs. So we call those hairs cilia, C-I-L-I-A. So ciliated epithelial tissue. And that is like the inside of your nose is ciliated epithelial tissue. The inside of our fallopian tube, of females' fallopian tubes, is ciliated. Little hairs, and those hairs act to waft the ova, the egg, from the ovary down into the uterus. So epithelial tissue, lots of different types, but one to be aware of is the ciliated, tiny little hairs that act as protection or help with movement, called cilia. Our second type of tissue is connective tissue. Really, that does what it says on the tin. So it's tissue around the body that forms a connection. So blood is a connective tissue, bone is a type of connective tissue, tendons, ligaments. Cartilage is another type of connective tissue. So remember, groups of cells are making up these types of tissue. Our next one, so our third type of tissue is nervous tissue. So the tissue that is the cells that are grouped together making up the tissue of the nervous system. And the two types or the two structures that this tissue creates is neurons and neuroglia. Neurons are our nerves, and neuroglia is a supporting structure to the nerves. And our last type of tissue is, so our fourth type and our last one is muscular tissue. So there's three types of muscular tissue in the body, some that are under voluntary control and some that are under involuntary control. The first one we're going to talk about is skeletal muscular tissue. Makes sense that this refers to the muscles that are attached to the skeleton. So they are striated or striped muscles. They have, when you see diagrams of those muscles, they have that very striped appearance of all the muscle fibers. And they are attached to our skeleton via tendons, which allows our skeleton to then move. So these skeletal muscles are under voluntary control. So they are under a person's conscious control. So as you move your arms, your legs, your head to the side, you wave at somebody, we might think that we're doing it automatically, but it is under complete conscious control. That's skeletal muscular tissue. Our second type of muscular tissue is visceral. V-I-S-C-E-R-A-L, visceral, but we call it visceral. This type of muscular tissue is not under conscious control, so it is involuntary, and it refers to the movement of organs within our body. So a really easy one to visualize is once we have swallowed our food or water, that swallowing action is a skeletal muscular action because it's voluntary. We choose when we've chewed our food when to swallow it. But once we've swallowed it, we then don't have to think about what it's doing. It just moves through our system. It doesn't just drop through, it is done under a muscular control, but it's not under our conscious control. We don't have to think, right, move down the esophagus, now in the stomach, stay in the stomach for 4 hours, now move into the small intestine. So there's an action that these organs have, which is called peristalsis, which is like a rippling action that moves that food and water through the digestive and the urinary systems. Without us having to think about it. We might be aware that the process is happening, but we don't have to consciously control it. Until that food or water gets to the end of the journey, and then once again, the excretion of that is under our conscious control. So the muscles that control us getting rid of waste are under our own control, under voluntary control. So visceral muscular tissue refers to actions that take place within the body that are not under our conscious control. And these muscles are referred to as smooth. So whereas our skeletal muscles are referred to as striated or striped, these muscles are referred to as smooth. And you can imagine that they have got a smooth lining, probably of epithelial tissue of some sort, that coat the inner part of them. And remember that peristalsis, that sort of rippling of getting food and waste through the body. And our last type of muscular tissue is called cardiac muscular tissue. You can probably guess that this is exclusive to the heart. And luckily, it is not under conscious control. So we don't have to consciously make our heart beat. The cardiac muscular tissue is involuntary. So when we're grouping cells together, we are forming something called tissue. There are 4 types of tissue. Epithelial tissue, which makes linings and coverings in the body. One to specifically be aware of is the ciliated epithelial tissue, which is hair-lined coverings or linings. Our second is connective tissue. There are 7 types of connective tissue in the body, and they are things that generally connect the body: blood, bone, cartilage, tendons, ligaments. Adipose tissue is another one, which is fat tissue. And also elastic is another form of connective tissue that sits in the dermis. We have our nervous tissue, which forms our nerves, nerve endings and the supporting structures, so our neurons and neuroglia. And lastly, we have our muscular tissue, 3 types: skeletal muscular tissue, which refers to the muscles that are attached to the skeleton under voluntary control. Our visceral muscular tissue, which relates to movement of substances through the body, not under our conscious control, so involuntary. And our cardiac muscular tissue, which refers to exclusively to our heart, which again is involuntary. So lastly, when we group 2 or more types of tissue, so we've looked at those 4 types of tissue there, when we group 2 or more of those together, we create an organ. Lots of organs in the body: liver, kidneys, lungs, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, etc. So each of those organs will have 2 or more types of those 4 types of tissue. So epithelial, connective, muscular, and nervous. So each of our organs, once you've clubbed 2 or more types of those tissues together, you create an organ. So for example, your stomach will have a lining, so it'll have epithelial tissue. It will have some connective tissue because it will be elastic. It'll be able to expand and unexpand. And it will have some muscular tissue because it needs to be able to move the food that we've eaten into it and then back out of it. So it will have some visceral muscular tissue. And off the top of my head, it's probably got a bit of nervous tissue as well, because we need to sense when our stomach is empty or when our stomach is full. So it makes sense that there'll be some nerves involved in that. So actually your stomach will have part of all 4 of the types of tissue. And that rounds off your cells and tissue. So just to recap, we have cells that are the building blocks of our entire body. Cells make up every part. You've got cells that are exclusive to your skin cells, you've got your nail cells, you've got your bone cells, your muscle cells, and so on. When you think of your cells, you want to think of them as little mini humans being able to do all of the functions and carry out all of the jobs that your human body can carry out. So within the cell, we have our organelles, very similar to our organs of our body. We have a brain of the cell to begin with, which will detail what that cell has to do and what function and job that it has. And then we've got other organelles, the mitochondria, which store or convert the nutrients that we eat into energy. We have our Golgi body, which is responsible for sorting and delivering the protein within the cell. Endoplasmic reticulum, which is responsible for transport. So think of your number 10 bus making its way around the cell, delivering and sorting and transporting things that need to be. We have our lysosomes, which is our waste disposal units. Our ribosome or ribosome, which stores the protein. And centrioles, responsible for mitosis or simple cell division, reproduction. This enables our cells to grow and repair, enables them to cellular respire, so allow oxygen in and carbon dioxide out, allow an exchange of gases, enables them to be sensitive, so they're able to be irritated and respond to changes in their environment. They're able to move. They're able to generate energy through metabolism, converting nutrients into energy. They're able to excrete, so to get rid of waste, and they're able to reproduce via mitosis. Once we group cells together, we form something called tissue. 4 types of tissue. Epithelial tissue, which creates linings and coverings within the body. Specific epithelial tissue to be aware of is ciliated, so it's cilia lined or hair lined, acts as extra protection. Second type of tissue is connective, does what it says on the tin. It's about connecting parts of the body. 7 types of connective tissue: blood, bone, tendons, ligaments, cartilage, adipose tissue or fat, and elastic. Third type of tissue is nervous tissue. So it's the tissue that forms the nervous system, the neurons, which transport signals around the body, and the neuroglia, which is a supporting system for the neurons. And lastly, our muscular tissue. 3 types: skeletal, attached to the skeleton under voluntary control; visceral, workings of organs inside the body with that peristalsis action, involuntary; and cardiac muscular tissue, exclusive to the heart, also involuntary. And lastly, when we get 2 or more types of that tissue together, we create an organ.